Buenas tardes de nuevo, estamos...
Good afternoon again. This is the second panel of the course on cultural policies in Europe in the face of integration challenges. And the second panel, United in Diversity from Theory to Practice, a Cultural Policy for Europe. We have Rosa María Martínez de Codes, who's a representative of the International Religious Liberty Association of the European Academy, and she's been from 1996 and 2002 in the ministry. She's a professor of history of the Americas, and she's an old friend in Yuste. She has coordinated courses related to heritage in the 16th century, related to Charles V, and also in a field which is the field of religion in Europe, and how to fit religious pluralism and diversity of beliefs in a moment where we are living a series of crises related to the humanitarian side, like the arrival of refugees who come with creeds, where there seems to be in Europe a certain idea of distancing. She's studying very closely this topic, and we want her contribution on her knowledge and experience around this question. Are we really united in our diversity, and the element of religious issues and European integration? You have the floor.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes.
Very good afternoon to you all. Thank you for being here, even at this time of the afternoon. And first of all, I would like to thank the previous speaker for his presentation, Augusto, because I think that this is a challenging panel. Miguel Ángel Martín introduced it as such. We are three panelists here with different proposals. Steve Austin is going to speak after me, and you need to create the link among the three of us with regard to our presentation and our views. So the challenge is, how are you going to link our different positions and interventions? Augusto suggested the pragmatical approach, because you, as cultural managers, you need to make decisions on how to manage diversity, and this is one of the greatest challenges at national and European level. Now I'm going to start thanking the director of this foundation, Juan Carlos, because I believe that for a few years now they are carrying out an exceptional work on how to integrate Spain within the European framework and vice versa, how to integrate Europe in the framework of Spain. I don't know what is your personal view on Europe. I don't know how you feel as European citizens. Is it a feeling? Is it a perception? Is it an assimilated idea? We're going to discuss that. United in Diversity is the motto of this panel. Managing diversity is the challenge that was set by my predecessor. And now I'm going to talk about a factor that unites and separates, which is the religious factor. I probably won't discuss it from the perspective that you may have in mind, but I would like to show you the challenges that Europe has to face, because the European dimension is the one that has to be in our minds. We need to stop thinking just as Andalusians, as Spaniards. We need to think as European citizens, and that is the key to manage that extreme wealth of diversity, and otherwise we'll be lost. I would like to link my words with the European initiative of fostering the European initiative that was called A Soul for Europe. because here we have representatives that will do things even better than myself, but I'd like to add my view why that initiative at first was important. To me, A Soul for Europe, it has had a long-standing trajectory. Do not think that all the panelists were born yesterday. They have a long trajectory in Europe, and it's about talking about values in Europe. Europe is not just based on the economy, but rather on values, and that is the foundation of Europe. I'm not talking about religion from a theological point of view. I'm talking about religion as a seed of values. When I was at the DG of religion, we try to coordinate the presence of our religious organizations in Europe and Spain, and to locate them and how to coordinate them in Europe to make them more visible. I would like to briefly talk about the start of that project, of the idea of a soul for Europe. I'm a historian, and so I would like to talk about a fact. In 1990, the then president of the EU Commission, Jacques Delors, he launched the idea of finding a soul for Europe. That is 1990. Some of you were probably not born, as a foothold for the construction and integration of Europe. Years later, Jacques Santer said that claiming a soul for Europe meant that churches and philosophical buildings and instances had to be invited so that they would give an interpretation and sense to the European building. That was not a new idea. I myself remember that one of the main founding fathers of the European Union, Robert Schuman, said at the beginning of 1960, and I quote, "Europe cannot and should not be an economical and technical enterprise no more. A soul is needed," end of quote. When they talk about finding a soul, they meant fostering what really would give cohesion to Europe. And what gives cohesion to Europe? Well, little by little, that idea became a tangible project, a soul for Europe. And that was open to religious and non-religious entities that were present in Europe from 1992 till nowadays. The first step that gave this soul a legal category was in Article 51 of the failed European Constitution, after the Treaty of Lisbon in Article 17 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union of 2009. Since then, the different European institutions have never stopped working in trying to have a dialogue, a fruitful dialogue with churches, associations, religious community, philosophical organizational, and non-confessional organization. At present, who is in charge of dialogue? Well, the main responsibility belongs to Vice President Timmermans. In June of 2016, just a few months ago, he met with the representatives of philosophical organization and non-confessional. He said, and I quote in English,
These are marked by a sense of crisis. It is essential to put our values into action. Nowhere is this discussion more relevant than with regards to migration and integration. Values cannot be imposed. They must pass on and embrace across generations and communities, and we need to find concrete ways to achieve this. Because of their engagement in their respective communities, non-confessional organizations are among those who can provide concrete ideas to move this discussion forward. Claro,
the fact that Europe is opening and trying to find other philosophical communities to discuss is an important step in Europe. As we all know, religious beliefs and membership to groups and religious communities have been the cornerstone of social relationships in Europe. And I am quoting one of the call on one of the projects, which was the Religious Diversity 2020 by Horizon 2020. The Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union introduced the right of freedom of thought, of belief and religion. The commitment of freedom of religion in Europe does not eliminate religious tensions that exist in many European societies that are exacerbated sometimes because they are instrumentalized because of political nature by extremists. That is why we need to better understand the setting of religions and secularism and spirituality in Europe. We need to contextualize, give a context to religious coexistence from a historical, legal, and sociological perspective, because this will help in promoting public and cultural European space from where we see diversity through inclusive practices. And we're going to discuss that, diversity and inclusive practices. In this line of work, I would like to say that one of the main problems that we have at present between the secular state, and I'm talking about the democratic state in Europe, and religions, they start when the country tries to have in its legal system the social cultural diversity by recognizing their rights. This problem is even thornier when the relationship with some religious minorities are even more difficult because there is some ethnic and religious discrimination perception. There is no agreement in Europe with regard to what are the answers that a secular state has to deal with the problem of how to integrate diversity in constitutional systems. In the European context, manifestations of diversity, religion or ethnics, they are born from the need that those people have to have their diversity recognized by authorities. These people request that their cultural and religious specificity, most of which are in the personal sphere, they need to be not just respected but also recognized. But these requests sometimes are understood as rights, and they break at times the legal systems. And that is why the state sometimes need to reconsider applying its own rules towards coexistence in society. The exercise of sovereignty belongs to the state, and of course that has to be based on rights and duties on citizens, regardless of its ethnic origin, culture, or religion. The secularized state talks about neutrality, but resistance towards difference is persistent, because if it's not legally recognized, then it coerces the freedom of individuals. The secular state recognizes this difference without knowing what are the risks. At the risk of the problem lays the fact that religions do not renounce to express the cultural legitimacy of their values and their right to exercise them and express them. And at this point, cultural sociology of religion has stronger arguments than the state itself, because there is a certain moral relativism and a relaxation of ethical conscience, and so they bring from the arc of their memories specific identity elements which can has cultural and religion structures that they defend as their particular values. On top of that, sometimes these structures have very radical and violent profiles. Naturally, all of this has nothing to do with the dialogue and the reasonable way of being. The state does not know what to do, and the secularity of the state cannot face what we call the polytheism of values, as Max Weber said. But in these societies that we call modern, the dominant secularized culture tends to accept these rules and manifestations of minorities to be recognized, and this contrasts the general rules of etiquette in order to improve social cohesion, although in a certain way these manifestations have radical views against the rights of the majority of this society. I'm going to give some examples. The migratory process in Europe shows a shift in direction from south to north that starts having an influence on legal European legal systems who are receiving migration coming from the south, from different countries. Even though the strength of what we call the legal monism has not made this phenomenon to be immediately recognized as a legal system, migration is making the law take new interpretations, and so new hybrid structures are coming to force, and they show complex ways of what we call cultural translation. That is how we translate from one culture to another. One important demand is that of Islamic communities in the UK who demand to control their community and private life. They want to defend their own traditional practices and their family codes, and these claims start in 1970s. They're not new in Europe, when the UK and Ireland Muslim Organization Union wanted to have an official recognition of a separated system from the family Islamic law that would be applied automatically to all British Muslims.
30 years later, British Muslims are stronger in their petition of autonomy. I'm not referring to the demands by extremist Muslim groups, but to the petition of the Association of Muslim Social Scientists in the United Kingdom, formulated in 2004 in the framework of a conference entitled Incorporating the Muslim Personal Law in Internal Law of the United Kingdom. And I'm going to quote a paragraph from there. That association referred to the following. Currently, Muslims have difficulties in the United Kingdom because their personal law is not recognized by secular civil courts. Marriages and divorces carried out according to the Sharia are not valid according to the national law, although they are acceptable in the eyes of God. This situation leads to difficulties, particularly as it refers to duties and rights between the spouses and divorced. The situation in the legal field of their children, property of their goods, and eligibility of benefits from the state. If a Muslim dies without a last will, his properties are not distributed according to Muslim Sharia. This leads to difficulties regarding who is the one who is entitled to the property regarding the inheritance of the deceased. From this we can see that there is a problem to transfer from non-official to official. That is the recognition explicitly by the state of a law of family, of a Muslim tradition, which is not enacted, but it is accepted. The change that is observed shows that these Muslim groups that wish that their cultural practices or their religious norms should be recognized or accommodated. Accommodation is part of the vocabulary, and it has many profiles. You, as managers, we will have to use this term in the future. This doesn't mean necessarily to recognize or accommodate cultural practices not mean that the claims by those cultural groups have a right or a legal system which replaces the official norm. There's no competition with the state law, but to interact with it. And this is an complex interrelation. But this entails the game of diversity. The contemporary liberal paradigm has changed the analysis framework, and the evaluation of minority legal systems is focused on the question of how to reinforce these systems, those norms, the autonomy of the individual and the equality of protection for their members. This is what one should ask. The classic example of this approach is whether that system will be able to fulfill the constitutional guarantee of the equality of a woman or not. In the case of Muslim women in Europe, it's quite visible the case, and internal inequalities of authority within Muslim communities may have disproportionate costs for women when the state tries to accommodate their religious or cultural practices. These costs means, for example, the establishment of marriage without the possibility of divorce, or the financial compensation in case of divorce, the abandonment of the custody to minors, and the restriction of the right to education, employment, and participation in the public sphere, etc. One should not forget that the different versions of multiculturalism, which are inclined to incorporate unconditionally minority groups, are also obliged by constitutional norms of the democratic state, which safeguard individual rights of all citizens and protect them from any damage, including if they want to pertain to non-liberal or religious communities. They are not outside those norms. When there is a risk of a significant damage, state should intervene to protect vulnerable people, irrespective of their voluntary denomination to a culture, religion, or specific religion, or their consent to a minority code. Central objection in Europe has to do with their contents. I refer to the fact that many aspects in the family law in Muslim tradition are incompatible with constitutional rights and human rights defended in legislation in Europe, and are against the norms of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against women. This is applied to the inequality of access between men and women related to different institutions of family law, like polygamy, divorce, and custody of children. But it applies also to differences in the rights and duties of men and women under marriage, and the differences of minimum age to marriage. From this perspective, the family law in Europe, depending on the questions that it regulates, has different options. It can be limited to recognize procedures of self-determination of minority groups. It can integrate institutions based on culture, norms, and values of those minorities. Or, lately, it can try to find creative legal procedures within the state law in order to reconcile divergent positions. The general trend allows us to hope that in this European Union, the relations between majorities and minorities is being defined in each member state of the EU, because there's no single cultural policy in Europe. There are many. The fundamental is the context where that culture is dealt with, because it has to take into account the historical tradition, the values that are within that culture. There's no single model. There's not a one-size-fits-all. I would say that the appropriate formula to integrate in the mainstream, the state mainstream, and we can talk about the Roma, the Hindus, whoever you can think of groups that ethnically or religiously are in the sidelines of the mainstream current. This requires accommodation and an effort. The effort goes more in the line of accepting socially than to accept a legal norm. If there is a social acceptance, integration is easier. However, it is clear that in that element of integration, the effort has to come from both sides. It's not a unilateral thing. It is bidirectional, meaning that cultural managers have to develop that sensitivity in order to indicate through which means these so-called marginalized groups in the periphery of the system can be better integrated. And there are many challenges. We, here in Extremadura, we have a lot of Muslim communities, and I'm going to finish taking advantage of the fact that in Spain there is an interesting phenomenon. I sometimes can emphasize when I'm in international fora or European fora, perhaps our tradition of integration of immigrants comes from the decade of the 60s and 70s, when many Muslims came from Syria, Lebanon, Morocco, then the wave of the 80s, and obviously the wave of the 90s. In our tradition, there is a lot of integration in Spain. There's no rejection or xenophobia, discrimination or marginalization of these groups. We haven't had those processes, generally speaking. You can observe the European map. There has not been political or parties or sectors in Spain which call for rejection or for hate to the other. This means that we have wealth in our historical itinerary, and this is what is precisely the value of our ability to manage culture has to emphasize, that ability to integrate. And there is where we are going hand in hand all together, and there Spain has a lot to contribute to the European map. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Rosa María. Undoubtedly, they're very interesting topics, very sensitive, and it could not be any other way when we dealt with a topic like religion, where we need to tread carefully. I don't know what to highlight. I liked everything, but I like the fact that you had remarked just at the end of your presentation that in Europe we talk about cultural policies in plural. If you see in the title of our program, we talked about cultural policies, and at first we talked about policy and then in brackets the S, so that we would put the focus on the European different policies. It's a subsidiary policy. Each member state has its own policy, although for what I can see based on the experience on the different fora that I have participated, there is a wish to create a common link among European policies so that we can move together in the right direction from the top of the European Union. Could this be one of the main problems that we face when we try to integrate those cultures that come from abroad, from other countries? And as history shows, they also belong to our past. They have been here for years. It's nothing new, even though at certain points of history it seems that the flux of immigrants is a bit more massive in number. There are some fears that I have seen on your presentation that they lack any basis, because the law is there to protect against that fear. So that's the first question, and with that I open the floor to the audience for some questions. What is failing Europe? Knowing that there is a legal system that protects in face of new cultures that can come with different religions, and that they can have a clash with the legal system and with the traditions from that country. All countries face the challenge of integration. That's the first thing that we need to know. It's not easy to go from one country and cultural model to another, especially when it is fueled by economical, social, political conflicts. Not all communities and not all individuals think as individuals in those communities. One of the most interesting problems that we face is the game of individuality, because sometimes the individual feels as a community and not as an individual. And Europe, at times, it has to face collectivities where the individual is diluted and the norm is imposed within a values and a belief system that has to be accepted by those individuals. And sometimes the rule goes against the individual. And we're talking about Europe of citizens. And that's why citizenship is important, because the focus is well placed by the European Commission, because it is on citizens. We need to generate and create citizens. We do not need to create communities, but rather citizens. We need to integrate them in citizenship through democratical views and ways of the rule of law. It's not easy to make that leap from that individual to the community according to the regulations that we have, because international conventions and human rights are for individuals, not for communities. So we see that we need to understand and deal with this phenomenon. How is an individual generated, and how do you go from an individual to the identity of citizenship? Because these people, sometimes they belong to that community, and how do they become individual citizens? And that's what we need to go from praxis to regulation, and for me that's the hard stuff. Do you think that the European Union is prepared and ready for it? We're all European Union. When they talk about European Union, then I think, well, we're all European Union. We're in a strategic position here in Spain, because historically we have been located there, and thus we have an Atlantic projection. That's how we conquered what we thought was at the other side of the world, and we didn't even know where we were heading at the time. Having said that, I think that Spain has a lot to say, a lot to add, and I think we should adopt a role with more proposals. We need to do more, and you are at the right place to manage culture, and that is why we need to have more initiative in Spain. Any question from the audience? Any doubts that may come to you? It's a complex topic. Hello, my name is Ignacio. I'm not sure I understood within the problem what is the role that us as European citizens, what is the role that we play there in the problem of integrating communities within the framework, legal framework, that we would protect negative freedom of the individual. Maybe you're insinuating that the paradigm inherited from the past, where we protect the individuality of the individual to develop its own personality as he or she sees fit, maybe that is faced with different groups that are not under that paradigm. I don't know if that is what you are suggesting, for instance, in England, which was the case that you gave. I really like your question. I think that your question is the question that has to be asked. My text invites to having that doubt, and I built that text, I wrote it, because we need to think about what I want you to think is, what does she think? I know how to solve what I ask, but the problem is on the citizen, and you need to solve it. In the new paradigm that we have based on diversity, both the secular state and the citizens, they're facing the phenomenon of integration and integrating diversity. Which way? The old way, as you suggested, or by integrating communities with their own family law and different settings? Are always formulas, they exclude each other. Is it one or another, or can they both go? How many years have you taken to be or have an identity? For religion leaders, that is the same. And second generation citizens that are Muslims that were born in Marseille, for instance, in France, are they French? Are they European? They're European. What type of citizenship is he or she generating? That is the question. It's not an easy answer. But thank you for your question, because I wanted to make you doubt. My doubt was the following. I don't know if consequences have been studied when linking two phenomena that are not the same. For instance, Islamic marriage and Catholic marriages with different effects and consequences. And have we thought about common consequences? You know that the man is a wolf for the man, and maybe we have different citizens, different subjects, and that could be taken advantage by assimilating two different phenomena to similar consequences. I know it's late, and so I want to give you a very specific answer. There are many ways of managing culture in Europe, and each sovereign state and country needs a different model, a cultural model. And similarly, when we're dealing with religions and states, there are different types of relationships. Spain in 1992 had an agreement with different religions, and Islamic community was recognized its religion marriage. It's not recognized per se, but Islamic people, they have a civil marriage, then they register, and they are married by only through civil law, not through Islamic religion. So we have already overcome the effects of different religious marriages, of different conventions. So I don't think we have to think about legal recognition. We need to incorporate other more creative formula. For instance, maybe you know, why not kosher meals and halal meals are included in hospitals, in prisons, in schools? Why not, if minorities are asking for them? Institutions and organizations are trying to accommodate the context where the demand exists. Sometimes practices are more useful than regulations when we are talking about accommodating religious and ethnic manifestations. Thank you. Last question, maybe two questions at the same time, and we finish our panel.
Accommodating regularly the requests of minorities is being used in a critical way by certain extremist political movements. Indeed, some recent immigrants who are not yet citizens are flatly refusing to integrate according to the rules which are existing in the countries where they arrive. Now, in some cases we have calls for a different treatment between a citizen and a non-citizen. For example, a non-citizen who commits a crime will be tried, will purge his sentence if he is condemned. Should he then be expelled from the territory of the continent of Europe because he is unfit to be in this continent? Or, as certain other groups say, should we accommodate this person, trying to redeem this person as we would with a full citizen? It is a very delicate problem, because we are playing otherwise in the hands of certain extreme movements who are basing their defense of our, supposing they exist, values on the expulsion of those who would be forcefully different.
Sí, vamos a la otra pregunta y...
I have just one question. When I heard you talk about the project of England of integrating the Sharia with the UK common law, how can European EU law and like law accommodate it? Because Sharia is based on God and is a primary text that cannot be modified. So how can we accommodate these two antagonic views and opposite views from anthropological point of view? I'd love to have an answer to everything. I don't. I'm going to try to give an answer to the question. I'm going to continue in English and then in Spanish. I'm going to continue in Spanish. It is obvious that in Europe, certain lobbies, and lobbies in the political sense of the word, they exercise their pressure on EU states and institutions in order to create different categories with regard to what a citizen is allowed or not, and what is a non-citizen is allowed to do. We are a very delicate moment, a very complex moment, because of what we call the refugee crisis, which is a term difficult to assimilate, that refugee crisis, when we are actually dealing with a problem that affects us all as citizens. It does not just affect one state or the other, and the other are indifferent. But the reality is that the political pressure in some states, some member states, is stronger than in others. How can we solve the problem that non-citizens, when they commit a crime, they have to be automatically expelled? Well, each member state is regulating that depending on what is the legal framework that they have and what are the pressures that they have to deal with. There is not just one answer. What is the strength of the state in order to not give in to this expelling of citizens? Well, maybe we should think about it. What is the strength of each member state on how to not give those citizens back when that person who's been expelled does not even know where he's been expelled to. Maybe we can discuss this further on. And with regard to the second question, it's not about accepting or integrating the Sharia law, which is theologically based. It's not about having that in the EU law. That's not the question, of course not. That's out of question. What Islamic communities who live in Europe demand, and in the case of Ireland, of the UK, is that they include some aspects of family law. It's not the whole Sharia law, but just some aspects of family law that are important to them, for those members of that religious community. They're interested on family law, on marriages, divorces, etc. They want their system to work in Europe. Is that compatible with our legal system? That's what we need to visibilize and to study that without really breaking the main framework of law. Thank you. Thank you, Rosa.